Welcome to the third appointment in the series Supranational Democracy Dialogue. We are happy to be with you today to speak about improving European economic governance. You know, it's a very lively debate now in Europe, and maybe it's interesting also outside of Europe, because it's an attempt to manage at a supranational level a problem which is bigger than a single state's dimension. So it's an attempt to find shared solutions to verify if solidarity among states and across the states is possible. And we are going to discuss this with a very interesting panel of experts. We are here 2 professors of law and 2 professors of economics, very much focused on European affairs. And so I'm very happy to introduce shortly our guests. We have Paolo Garonna, who is professor of political economy in Lewis University in Rome. And he has also a very extensive, interesting experience in international organizations such as UN, OECD. And moreover, he is also Secretary General of the Federation of Banks in Italy, FEDBAF. So we have also Professor Fabio Masini, Jean Monnet Chair and Professor of Economics and focusing on European integration also in University of Roma 3. And I'm also happy to inform you that the Jean Monnet network dedicated to reforming the Eurozone, a critical discussion, is co-hosting this event. And so this network has been launched by Professor Masini, and I'm honored to be part of it. Then we have also a professor of European law from Torino University, Professor Francesco Costamagna, who is an expert not only in European Union affairs, economic affairs, but also on the impact that they have on the European welfare systems. So this topic is very hot in Europe right now. And last but not least, we are so lucky that we will be moderated by Lorenzo Consoli, a very well-known journalist specialized in European affairs and correspondent from Brussels, who has also been the president of Foreign Journalists in Brussels for years. So I'm honored to leave him the floor, as he will be our host for today. So thank you all for being with us, and thank you, Lorenzo, for taking the floor and manage this meeting.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Lorenzo Consoli, correspondent for ASCA News in Brussels, Italian news agency. I've been in Brussels working as a journalist in 1991, and I would like to start immediately with this discussion on. We start with Paolo Garonna from the Lewis University, and this will be an intervention about the euro and the union, the economic and monetary union, Europe, and I think that Professor Garonna is going to tell us something about the sustainability of the euro, even without a federal state. This seems to be quite an interesting issue. So, Professor Garonna, please, you have the floor.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I think now you can hear me, and I am very happy to be in Brindisi, virtually, of course, for this very topical and timely conference. I have prepared a few slides. I will leave it as background documentation, so don't worry, I'll try to be very brief and conveying really a very simple message that the fact that the euro is a supranational currency is often neglected and not given enough attention to. Because in this attribute, the supranational nature of the euro, lie, in my view, the potential strength and also the mission, the important mission of the euro, which is to contribute to supranational governance and democracy. So I will discuss this by first looking briefly to the euro's vulnerabilities and how to fix them. I think we will have an opportunity to go more in depth in the discussion, and my colleagues will probably go into the details. The devil is in the detail. But I then plan to focus on the main attack to the euro that come from the outside, and the fact that this is a currency without a state, so we need first to achieve political union before we can have a euro that works. Or fiscal union, we need a centralized budget, a finance minister, before we can make it work. And finally, Rodrigues, I will look at Rodrigues, a very prominent Turkish-American economist, with his trilemma that basically he thinks that the euro is a threat to independent policy making, economic policies, and to democracy. Is really so I think his attack is quite important, because it does correspond to some kind of orthodoxy, new orthodoxy in international economic and financial circles. Then I will move on to the real trilemma that matter, which is Mandel's trilemma, and we'll discuss this, and finally I will conclude with some speculations on the future of the euro. This obviously very little time. So let me start from the euro's vulnerability. Let's see. Okay. So I think we all know what are the vulnerabilities of the euro, and I think the crisis, I think that's what crises are for, obviously has made those vulnerabilities particularly evident. The fact that we rely excessively on monetary policy is the famous theorem of the bicycle. We have a bicycle that runs only on one wheel, and I think we teach 101 economics course to students and explain that you cannot have economic policy on a bicycle with one wheel. So you need a fiscal and some elements of a fiscal policy, and that's what we are now discussing with the recovery plan and other tools that go into that direction. So the lack of fiscal capacity and the recovery plan, the weak international role of the euro, it's an important and successful currency, but we don't have European safe asset in a period when there is a run on safe assets, and so I think there is somehow a pot of gold in the world created by this savings glut, and we cannot tap it because we simply have not found a way of doing it, because we have to do it together, and also we should have also a single voice in international fora. And finally, the social dimension, which is also very important and very often neglected. Now, I think, you see, the main, as I said, I mean, I am not too much concerned about the vulnerabilities, the real vulnerabilities I talked about, even though I know that the political debate is all on that, because I think we know how to fix them. And I think, we have always come through the crisis moving onwards, and I think we will move onward. It's a slow train. It's probably, it comes late and doesn't travel fast enough, but it moves on. And I think I think as we did in the previous crisis, we will move on. What I'm more concerned about is the attacks on the euro that come from the outside. First of all, this idea that you cannot have a currency. Sometimes this comes also from convinced Europeans and Europhiles that you cannot have a currency without a state. So you need first political union before you can fix the euro. Since the political union is not there and probably will never come, then the euro is doomed. Now, there are a lot of objections to this. I've listed it. the monetary union has already a political dimension, and we have a lot of elements within the currency area of an optimal currency area: openness, financial integration, price stability. There is an optimal currency area endogeneity, which means that the euro itself, through its existence, its operation promotes reforms, as we have seen in labor market reforms, in mobility of labor and human capital, pension and welfare reforms. So I think what we don't have, we will create. So I think, the political union process is unfinished business. It will move on, but this has nothing to do with the survival of the euro. The same thing applies to fiscal union. And the idea that somehow we need, for making the euro work, to have a full-blown budget, and so we would have to give up the principle of subsidiarity, fiscal federalism, safeguard of local cultures. This is not necessary, I think, because we can have a small budget, but so I think we can fix the euro without having a full-blown fiscal union. I know this in the political discussion today, for instance, on the recovery plan, everybody is focusing on the quantity aspects. It's going to be 500 billion, 1 trillion, 1.5 trillion, 2 trillion, as if the size doesn't matter. I think what matters, because I think the resources are going to be there, what it matters is how it's going to be managed, for doing what, how do we do it together. And so I think this is much more important. The quality is much more important than the quantity. But I think on Roderick's dilemma, we need to focus really, because this comes from an economist who is very influential and reflects a new orthodoxy, a new consensus, Washington consensus in the global economy. The idea that somehow, if you want, you can't have at the same time globalization, deep economic and financial and monetary integration, and at the same time democracy, and at the same time national economic policy, sovereignty, and independent policy. So I think you have to make a choice, and what is clear is that Roderick, in line with mainstream thinking, thinks that we would have to, if we want to safeguard national prerogatives, sovereignty, which can only be, according to this view, obviously, can only be at national level, and if you want to preserve democracy, which can only be, according to this view, at national level, then I think you have to sacrifice globalization, economic integration. You have to put the brakes on global value chains. You have to put constraints on capital mobility, and I think that is, as I said, the main view now in economic circles. Now, I think I disagree with this view. That's clear, for whatever my disagreement is worth. But I think, and I would like to show why this is not credible, and actually when a contrary view must be upheld if we really want to make progress and give the euro its right role and mission in the world. Now, Roderick speaks of a trilemma that is much older than today's. He goes back to the Mandel's trilemma, which Mandel is a Nobel Prize economist who produced this important contribution in the 1960s, and he was talking of this impossible trinity between fixed exchange rates, capital mobility, and independent monetary policy. But you see, the two trilemmas, in spite of the similar wording, are completely different. I mean, for Roderick, as I said, what counts is that you should safeguard sovereignty, national independence, and national democracy, and all the rest is can be sacrificed. Is a cost that can be that we can try to sacrifice. For Mandel, it was the opposite way. For Mandel, you needed stability in exchange rates, which is essential to promote trade, investment, and financial integration. And in order to do that, you would have to have not independent national policy. In particular, you would have interdependent monetary policy. It was actually monetary policy that would take the role of re-equilibrating balance of payment disequilibria. And then I think the question of democracy did not matter, in the sense that you can have democracy by specific mechanism. You see, if you want to place historically Mandel's intellectual contribution, you have to think that between the 60s and the 70s, two very important things happened, more or less at the same time. The first thing is the Nixon shock of 1971, which took the dollar off gold, and by declaring the inconvertibility of the dollar, put an end to the international monetary system under the Bretton Woods regime. And at the same time, more or less at the same time, we had the beginning of the European Monetary Union. The decision was taken in the Hague Council in '69. Now, there is a discussion, what came first and what afterwards, what caused what? Was it the breakdown of the stability of the Bretton Woods system that pushed the European towards monetary union? Or was it, on the other side, the fact that the Europeans were moving steadily towards monetary union that pushed the Americans to break the Bretton Woods system? I mean, I leave that to the historians, but it's certainly true that those things happen together. So you see, Mandel was a convinced European, and he is considered one of the intellectual fathers of the euro. He thought that the euro had an important role in redrawing the map of currency areas, in representing a countervailing power to the dollar, but a friendly countervailing power to the dollar. And in that way, you see, it could play a role really in giving a multilateral, a multi-currency leadership, guidance to the global system. Now, you may think this is history, goes back, and now I think it's Roderick's thinking that is informing, if you want, the mainstream thinking. This is not the case. I think very recently we have had a return of this problematic, and I want to quote here two important contributions. I mean, Mark Carney, the former head of the Bank of England, just left his job a few months ago, who only a few months ago gave an important contribution on the reform of international monetary system. This was given in Jackson Hole end of August of last year, and he gave a very critical assessment of the present state of the international monetary and financial system, very much in line with Mandel's thinking. He believes that this system or non-system, this chaos, is responsible for the deflationary bias in the world economy and the long-term negative real rates of interest. So all the discussion among economists of why I think we have this slowdown in long-term slowdown in productivity growth, this secular stagnation of the global economy, and whether it's due to the fact that steam engine is more important and pervasive than ICT. I think, according to Carney, this misses completely the point. The point is that we have a monetary system which builds a deflationary bias in the world economy. And he goes on actually to say that this is also encouraging protectionist and populist policies. Now Mark Carney is not a black bloc, so I think when he criticizes in those strong terms the international monetary system, it must be taken into account. And what he proposes is a new multipolar system with multiple reserve assets, and also he suggests strengthening the role of international governance institution, supranational institution like the IMF. Now he was talking in the middle of last year, so he's very astute, obviously, and smart, and so he didn't mention at all the euro in the midst of the Brexit saga. But it's very clear that the euro is very present in this discussion, because it's only the strength of the euro that can force and the friendliness of the euro that can force and convince the Americans to sit at the coordination table and to give a stronger and more multilateral transatlantic leadership to the international monetary system. He then suggests something like a synthetic currency, a cryptocurrency, to replace the dollar, a synthetic hegemonic currency. It's a very interesting contribution, and I want to conclude by mentioning an important contribution of an Italian economist who is very dear to me, by the way, Tommaso Padua Schioppa, whose last book, which came out posthumous and I think contained a contribution given only a few months before he died. He had this very important, interesting title, The Ghost of Bancor. And Padua Schioppa makes an argument which is very similar to Mandel's and also Carney and others. He criticizes the double monetary nationalism of the present arrangements, because we have two nationalisms. We have, first of all, this idea that you can have independent national monetary policies made consistent with one another simply because of exchange rates. I think politicians, policymakers at home can do what they want, and you can understand how attractive is this for many politicians to think they can do whatever they want, and then exchange rates will take care of it, because then I think through inflation, devaluation, we can fix it. And also there is another nationalism, the fact that the whole system based on flexible exchange rate is managed by an independent national monetary policy, is managed from Washington and from the U.S. Central Bank. So I think this is very critical of this of these two dogmas, saying that this is a double illusion, that it's that cannot work because flexible exchange rate are not market driven, because they still are expression of the monopolistic power of national central banks, and domestic policy cannot be independent, but they have to be interdependent, and they have and monetary policy, but also fiscal policy. And also the role of the Fed as the cornerstone of the international monetary system is important. It must be based on cooperation and coordination. So I think there is this paradox of the euros, that it has potentially the strength to launch a monetary reform process, but is oddly unaware of this and shows reluctant to exercise any form of responsibility. And so I think the challenge is that to replicate at the global level what we have done with the euro, introducing supranational disciplinary elements in the governance mechanism of the international monetary system. And it's interesting that he speaks of the ghost of Bancor, who sounds very much like Banquor. You recall in Macbeth, Banquor is a great friend of Macbeth, and Macbeth, after killing the king, kills him because of jealousy, but then on the basis of the prophecy of the three witches, the descendants of Banquor will become king. So I think we can really see the euro as a descendant of this idea of Bancor, the global currency, which was Keynes' idea, at the time where everybody was thinking of the need of a global currency. The Americans were calling unitas. I think Mandel was calling it Intor, and so now I think the euro will have to play this role. And the important thing is that they are all supranational currencies. So they are not, I mean, let me stress this, they are not national currency. The euro is not a national, never will be a national currency, because Europe will never be a nation, but it will be a family of nations. It's not an international currency, because the euro, because it does speak with a single voice in international fora, but it's not simply a matter of being part of a multilateral intergovernmental game. It's not going to be global, because the euro as a reserve asset is not going to be the overwhelming role of the dollar. Is not aggressive, is not overpowering. It will be soft power, and so I think, you know, the euro as a supranational currency would be probably the most important asset of supranational democracy, which is the title of our meeting. Thank you very much.
Okay, very interesting, Professor. I don't know if I can ask one little question at the end of all this. Can I, Susanna?
Yes, please.
Yeah, because it looks like it's all fine. I mean, Professor, is there something that the euro needs to do in order to be sustainable, or it's enough as it is, in your opinion? Doesn't need to do anything. No reform of the Stability Pact, no safe asset, no new fiscal coordination. What do you think is needed in order to make the euro sustainable? Because in this moment there is a big, a very big, I think, revolt against the euro in many countries. It is led by the populists, but as you know, probably there is a lot of sovereignism that is not only expressed by the populist forces, but also by the left, by people that were pro-European until a few years ago, a few months ago even. So what do you think is the main reforms that the euro needs in order to remain sustainable? Thank you.
Well, I think, as I said at the beginning, there are a lot of things that need to be fixed to make the euro more sustainable. It is already sustainable, to make it more sustainable, and we know what they are. We know, for instance, that we need some elements of fiscal policy. We hope that the recovery plan is going that direction. We will have to see, but it's, I think we are not only focused now on how we can tap debt markets with a joint debt instrument, so common debt. That's fine. I think that's very important, but I think it will be also even more important to see how we manage to spend it, and to spend it wisely, so that we gain credibility also in financial markets. So we need a European safe asset. This is also extremely important. That I mean, there is a run now on safe assets, because I think all the reserves that are accumulated by emerging market economies, they have to be placed somewhere. And so I think, you know, now we'll say, who is going to pay? Nobody is going to pay for this recovery plan if we just set up in the right way, because we, you know, we have negative real rates of interest. So I think, you know, it's just, but we must have a European safe assets. We must complete the banking union, and we need to have private risk sharing through capital markets, and so we need to complete capital markets union. We need to have some fiscal element in the common backstop for the single resolution fund. I think it's now placed with the ESM. Okay, I think it's better than nothing, but it's not really the intergovernmental nature of the ESM that it should be brought back to the community. So I think, but you see, these are details, and so I think I come back to the gist of your question, which is the politics of the euro. I think on that we have to be more aware and firmer. We need to push back the attack that comes from this not from the anti-Europeanists, but I mean this comes up from this mainstream idea that you can have an independent monetary policy, you can print, you can solve your debt problems, for instance, or your public expenditure problem at the printing press. And this is something that unfortunately it's now authoritatively supported at a global level by the system or non-system that we have. So I think we need to fix that in order to be able to respond credibly to the political attacks.
Thank you for the answer. It's there's a world out there that should be developed more, perhaps in another occasion or later. I think we can pass now to Professor Francesco Costamagna from Turin, and I think this is going to be about the measures that the EU has taken in response, for the economic response to the COVID-19 crisis. We have heard for so many weeks and months now that the EU was not doing enough, that it was useless sometimes, that it was late, it didn't understand the magnitude of the crisis. In the last few weeks, I think this narrative has begun to change a little bit, and we are seeing that there's quite a lot of things that the EU is doing. So, Professor Costamagna, please tell us what is the EU doing actually against the economic crisis induced by the COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation, and let me thank first of all Susanna for having invited me to participate in this dialogue, and the whole team of the University of Salento, and also the two wonderful people that help us to get even into this platform, that is Renzo Rucco, that help us a lot also from the technological side. So having said that, yes, what I will try to do in these 10 minutes that I will try to restrain my talk is to just track, no more than track, the most recent development that has taken place at the European level with regard to the reaction to the economic crisis that is very much linked and very much generated by the pandemic. The first thing that we have to say is that so far, most of the money that has been spent as a reaction to the COVID-19 crisis has been national monies, so they come from the national purse. The EU has kind of facilitated this intervention by the member state, basically by suspending the application of the Stability and Growth Pact, and also relaxing. It's even too soft saying relaxing, also basically suspending the application of state aid rules, so that member states were kind of free to spend as much as they could to save undertakings, to put money into the real economy, to help people that have lost their jobs, and so on and so forth. What is the problem with that approach? The problem is, of course, that member states have very different spending capacity, so this is going to create distortions in the internal market, and that will encroach upon the socioeconomic cohesion within the EU. So there is now the need, which is very much felt, especially in southern member states, the need to find some common approach, some common instrument to face the crisis that is going to be tough and quite long, especially because some member states, Italy, Spain, and other member states, are no longer capable to sustain this effort by themselves. So the first approach by some member states, northern member states, the self-defined frugal member state, was that, okay, we have already some mechanism in place. We set up this mechanism in the sovereign debt crisis of 2010, 2012, and so on and so forth. We have, for instance, the ESM, which is the European Stability Mechanism, I'm not going to talk about the ESM. I think Fabio Masini will do it much better than I can. But still, they said you have to go and ask for money there. But of course, well, I don't know whether of course, but Italy and Spain rejected this approach, rejected this proposal, saying that those mechanisms, which has been created for another type of crisis, which was a sort of an asymmetric crisis, was not feasible, were not very much useful in the context of the pandemic-related crisis, because this is a symmetric crisis and this is a crisis that is due to an external shock. And as Mario Draghi has said, this time is not due to the profligacy of some member state, that this was the main narrative of the sovereign debt crisis, which was a narrative which was not very convincing, was quite partial, but was very strong, especially in certain member states, such as Germany, the Netherlands, so on and so forth. But those member states seem to be still there. If you look at what the Prime Minister of the Netherlands is still saying, they keep repeating the member states which are most in difficulty, like Italy and Spain, should, okay, receive money, but they should receive money through loans. And this loan has to be subject to strict conditionality. So some conditions have to be attached to this financial assistance, as it used to be in the sovereign debt crisis. When they think about conditionality, and when we all think about conditionality, at least many people think about conditionality, they normally think about austerity conditionality. This has become a common conviction that conditionality means cut to social spending. Okay, this is an equation which is still very much enforced, even though, and I will try to say something on that, I think there might be other forms of conditionalities, and that can be helpful to foster social cohesion, economic growth, and all what we're looking for now. Now, member states kept debating for quite a long time, already some months, and they had the privilege to keep on debating without finding a compromise, because someone else, like the ECB, opened a very big umbrella, which is called the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program. And this very big umbrella, which has an envelope of 750 billion euro, helped many member states to keep financing themselves on the financial market. Now, the long-term viability and sustainability of this umbrella has been challenged by many points of view. Many people saying that monetary policy cannot do the job that fiscal policy should do. But then also the German Constitutional Court, and I think that Susanna is going to deal with it, so I'm not going to go very much in depth into this judgment, but still, this judgment of the 5th of May 2020 basically said that the ECB has gone too far. Has gone too far because now this instrument, the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program, is no longer just a monetary policy instrument, but it has very strong economic policy effects, and these economic policy effects have not been sufficiently taken into account in the evaluation by the ECB, and then the action of the ECB is ultra vires. This is how it's called. So it goes beyond the competence of the ECB. So now, what one of the possible reaction to this judgment, and many commentators kind of advocated for that, says, okay, now member states have to realize that they have to do something. They cannot just rely upon the ECB to do their job by sort of de facto mutualization of debts. They have to decide to take a decision upon the possibility to inject some form of common fiscal policy, very embryonal fiscal policy into the system. And something is started to happen. What happened so far? So what we have achieved so far? The first result that we have achieved is the adoption of the so-called SURE. SURE is an acronym that stands for Should Support to Mitigate Unemployment Risk in an emergency basically is a reinsurance mechanism that should help to finance short-time work scheme and similar measures, that is those measures that have been put in place or that were already in place and that have been overused in this crisis to cope with unemployment and supporting income of people that lost their jobs. This is a temporary measure. It's not a stable one. It's just a measure that should work for the unemployment created by the pandemic. Assistance has to be requested by a member state that is facing a sudden and severe increase in unemployment-related expenditure. And what is interesting here, talking back of conditionality, there is no conditionality. At least there is no austerity conditionality. Nonetheless, there is a condition because the money, the loans which are given to the state that ask for assistance, these loans are kind of earmarked. So you can use this, the state can use these resources, but only in a certain sector, that is to help fighting unemployment, not for other purposes. Lastly, the capacity of this instrument is rather limited. Is 100 billion euro, which is better than nothing, but of course it's a good step forward, but alone it won't do the trick. Another things that we have already achieved after several rounds of negotiation is that now member states can rely upon the ESM, the European Stability Mechanism, for health-related expenditure. And here the major element of novelty is that the financial assistance provided by the ESM in this case comes without austerity conditionality, once again. But once again, the condition here is the final destination of the money. This money can be used only for healthcare related expenditure. So there is no classical austerity conditionality. There is another form of conditionality, so to speak. But here we come, and so I can start moving toward the end of my talk. Here we come to the big shot, or the one that should be the big shot. That is the so-called recovery fund. Member states decided that yes, we can go ahead with that, but they took a very broad and generic decision in the European Council at the end of April without giving not many details about how this system, how this mechanism should work, how it will be financed, and so on and so forth. Now, a few days ago, Germany and France came out with a proposal. They tabled a proposal. The size of the recovery fund proposed by the German and the French is smaller, significantly smaller of what was expected, because it's around 500 billion euro, and there were talk about 1 trillion or even 2 trillion euros, but still the proposal is very interesting under many aspects. So what we're talking about, we're not talking about mutualization of debts, which has been put out of the discussion now because northern member states were strongly against any idea of mutualization of debt. Here what we have is a mechanism which should be financed by bonds, which are issued by the Commission on behalf of the European Union. So it's the European Union that go in the international financial market and can finance at very good rate because of the credibility of the European Union, of course. And by the way, this is already a mechanism that works with regard to the SURE, even at a more limited stance, but it is a step forward because this money should be given to the member state according to the French-German proposal, not through loans. So this will not accrue to the national debts, and this is good for a heavily indebted country like Italy, for instance, but through grants. So this is the first major element of novelty if this proposal is adopted. Another element which in my view is quite interesting is that this money should be spent, the proposal says, in accordance with the priorities of the the objectives and the priorities of the European Union. This is not clear what this means. The proposal, the press report is still quite generic on this point. We don't know what this means. Does it mean that we see austerity back in town because one of the objectives is fiscal sustainability? Yes, it might be, but also other objectives. The EU also pursue other objectives, such as promoting social cohesion, but also think about the so-called green revolution. Now we have a Green Deal or something like that, which the Commission von der Leyen put at the first place in their list of priorities. So I think that the way in which these money are going to be spent is going to be one of the most important elements in this negotiation. What's the problem here? The problem here is that this mechanism is going to operate within the next multi-annual financial framework, which is going to be has to be adopted by the end of this year. And the adoption of the multi-annual financial framework come through a unanimous decision by the Council. So it will be very tough to make it pass. And the risk is that to find a compromise, this proposal can be watered down. This is the main fear of some early commentators of the French-German proposal. And then the last point is that what about austerity conditionality? Is there any role for austerity conditionality in this bill? Well, if you read the proposal by the French and the German government, they make a reference to the fact that beneficiary states have to clearly commit toward pursuing a sound budgetary policy. So there is a reference to that. It's not clear how this should happen, whether these countries have to sign a memorandum of understanding. I don't think so. But we see other member states, Austria, Sweden, Finland, and in particular the Netherlands, that are again pushing hard toward the reintroduction of some sort of austerity conditionality also in the context of this mechanism. I think this will be a crucial element in the upcoming negotiation. Now, on the 27th, if I'm correct, the Commission should table its own proposal. We will see whether it will follow the pattern of the proposal tabled by the German and the French, or if the Commission will try to go beyond that proposal, or it will be more timid than that proposal. But I think this proposal has the merit of shaking a bit the debate, and now I hope that some form of compromise will be found for the long-term or medium-term sustainability, also political sustainability. I'm not just speaking about the economic sustainability of the euro. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Professor. If I may add one thing, I think it was quite clear. It emerged in the last 2-3 days. I think this issue of the possible conditionality for austerity measures is crucial, actually. And what has emerged in the last 2-3 days is that actually the way it will work. You mentioned the possibility of a possible memorandum of understanding that you said is not what you think will come. There is actually a mechanism that will be used according to what the Vice President of the Commission, Dombrovskis, was saying yesterday, yes, the other day, which is the so-called BIC.
Yes.
This is the budget of the euro area. It was called like that before, then it was named BIC. And this, we don't know yet what's going to happen, because this is exactly the debate that is still ongoing in the Commission in these very days, and the result will be the proposal on Wednesday. But it is still going on, the debate, if this the use of the BIC mechanism will lead to asking for austerity measures or only asking for respecting the two priorities on the Green Deal and on digitalization of the economy as a way to orientate the new investments. And I think, I mean, this is where there's a difference between the professors and the journalists. I've got the very last, I don't have, of course, the depth of the analysis that you have, and I thank you for that. It's really interesting. But in the very last hours, it is clear that that's exactly the debate. What is this big mechanism going to be used for? And there is also a news that came yesterday, which is quite interesting. The Director General of the Reform Directorate General in the Commission will be an Italian, is Nava. So it would be interesting to ask him, perhaps, what they intend to do about this. Okay, I think perhaps I can ask you one thing about, do you think that the model that has been used for the SURE mechanism is the same model that is going to be used for the recovery instrument? Because it looks like they are looking at the same, the legal basis 122.1 and 0.2 as legal base. Do you think it will be the same, or do you think there will be a difference in the recovery instrument as the Commission will propose it on Wednesday?
I think that the legal basis, the 122, is going to be used because what they want to say by using this legal basis and not other legal basis that will be available, 175, and thinking about cohesion policy, is because the German want to stress the fact that it's just a temporary measure, it's an emergency measure. And 122, just not to be too legalistic, 122 is an article of the treaty that allowed the EU to intervene to help member states in a spirit of solidarity. This is written in the article, but only for emergency cases. Okay, so the German want to make sure, and this is sort of a compromise, want to make sure that this recovery fund is conceived just as a temporary measure. There is no way, from that perspective, then we see what happened, at least in Italy. There is nothing more long-term than what is thought to be an emergency measure, but still, maybe in Germany it doesn't work like that. But their point is that we use that legal basis for that reason. There will be many changes. There will be many differences. The first one I've already mentioned. The money should be granted through grants and not loans. And the other one is that the SURE require member states to give guarantees, and quite important one, and it won't start to operate until the member state have put their guarantees in. Whereas the recovery fund shouldn't require member state, at least again, this is the proposal by the German and the French. There isn't this guarantee. The guarantee will be given by the EU budget, and this is a very big difference, of course. So there are elements of commonalities, but there are many differences too.
Yes, it's quite interesting because actually they are using the headroom of the EU budget for the guarantees, and that means it's money that is not
that come from the state. Yeah.
It's like engagements and not money spent, so it's not
true money.
Yeah, and okay. I think we can pass now. Thank you very much, Professor. We can pass now to Professor Fabio Marini from Roma Tre, the university, and this will be on the, we say in Italian, tormentone, which is the fact that there's a big polemic about an issue, and this is what happened in Italy about the ESM, the possibility of using the ESM for the health related expenditure, public expenditure. And I had to say this was for me working in Brussels, the whole debate in Italy was a little bit over the top. We just, I mean, in Brussels, it looked like people didn't understand exactly what it was, but then I think it helped to clarify well what it means that there's no conditionality. So Professor Marini, please let us know better what happened there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, first of all, to Susanna, who organized this very nice meeting. And thanks also to the other colleagues who decided to take part in this joint conference organized also by myself, let's say. Well, the title of my contribution might be The Past and Future of the European Stability Mechanism. Because I think that the European Stability Mechanism is a sort of a protagonist, certainly, of the European economic governance, but it's an actor in search of an identity. And I will try to explain a little bit why before going to the debates that we now have in Italy about the use or not of the resources of the ESM. Well, first of all, the history. The European Stability Mechanism was founded in 2012. Actually, it was started before, but it was founded in 2012. Why it was founded in that period? Because of the sovereign debt crisis. You know, everybody knows that Greece was out of the market, of the credit market. So in order to provide an instrument which was at the same time powerful and outside the bureaucratic processes of the European Union, it was funded by the governments themselves of the euro area. So basically, it was an instrument to rescue Greece and to provide a safeguard for the euro. Of course, the safeguard of the euro was not left only to the ESM, but was basically left to the intervention of the European Central Bank, who provided liquidity through the Draghi era. Not the outright monetary transactions, but the quantitative easing. All this came in a way, to an end in 2018. And that's why in 2018, in August, there was the end of the program with Greece, at least the end of the active program with Greece. And in December, the European Commission published a package of papers trying to imagine what to do with the European Stability Mechanism. And the idea was to bring it back into the legislation, into the structure of the European institutions, and transform the European mechanism, the European Stability Mechanism, into a proper European monetary fund. With a ministry, the Treasury Ministry, and probably also the president of the Eurogroup. And then during the last years, there was another important proposal concerning the European Stability Mechanism, which was to use it as a backstop. Paolo already mentioned it, to use it as a backstop for the Single Resolution Fund within the banking union. And that was a council proposal, and it's still under scrutiny, let's say. It was still under scrutiny in the pre-COVID era. The problem is that, of course, the COVID changed quite a lot all this instrument and all the status of the reform, the debate on the reform of the European economic governance. So there is a pre-COVID era and a post-COVID era from this point of view. And Francesco already mentioned quite a lot of improvement that we had in the last few weeks that we could never imagine only 3 months ago. So the recovery plan, the SURE, the liquidity provided by the European Central Bank, the ESM, and so on and so forth. So what is the role? What can be the role of the ESM? Well, in the emergency, we know that the proposal was to use the European Stability Mechanism for a liquidity assistance, let's say, in the expenditures related to the sanitary emergency. So we know that it's capped to 2% of the GDP. So Italy, for example, can access to something like 37 billion euros. And okay, of course, you want to know about the debate in Italy. Well, my opinion on that is that the debate is completely ideological and political. It has nothing to do with the technicalities of the functioning of the ESM. Because if we look at the opportunity cost of the use of the ESM resources, opportunity cost in economic terms means what are the alternatives? What is the cost of the alternatives to the use of these resources? Well, we can understand that we will anyway need those resources to face the emergency. And the alternative, of course, is to use the usual bonds, treasury bonds, 10 years treasury bonds usually, that on the market go around the 2% of the interest rate. With the ESM, we can access that same amount of money with about 0.1, 0.15 maybe interest rate for some years, which means that we can spare, let's say, 600 millions, of course, each year, 6 billions in 10 years. So it's a lot of saving. So from this point of view, from the technical point of view, we should access the resources of the ESM. Of course, there's a problem with the enhanced surveillance, macroeconomic surveillance, which is expected to start after the 3 years of the hypothetical emergency, but we will have that anyway. Anyway, we will have this kind of, let's say, conditionality, more enhanced conditionality once the sanitary emergency is passed. So again, the opportunity cost of using the ESM is quite low, and from this point of view, we should access it. But I would not like to stress only the opportunity to access the resources of the ESM now. I want to speak a little bit also about the future of the ESM. Of course, there are several proposals on the table, but I would like to speak about one in particular proposal which was made by myself, and that's why I'm speaking about that. And well, we wrote a very short paper with Alfonso Iozzo, who some of you might know. He was president of the Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, the Italian deposit and loan fund, for some years. So what we propose is that the European Stability Mechanism might become a sort of Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, so a fund for deposit and loans to be used in the next 10 years, more or less, to finance long-term investment for local systems. Because in the whole reform that we are under, that we have under our eyes in this moment, we have the supranational level, which is increasing its capacity, its fiscal capacity, also through the recovery fund, the recovery plan. We see that there are several injections of fiscal and monetary, of course, liquidity at the national level, but there is a crucial level which is left behind and which is anyway very important for the recovery in the next years, and it is very important also for the resilience of the societies in Europe, which is great local systems, metropolitan areas, territorial interconnected areas or systems, and so on and so forth, which will need a lot of money to reconstruct social fabric, industrial fabric, services, culture, sanitary systems, recycling waste systems, and so on and so forth. There will be an increasing need for localized public goods, let's say, local collective public goods. That's how we call it in the paper. And the European Stability Mechanism might provide the liquidity to assist this. Because it's quick, it's intergovernmental, which is a problem, of course, from a certain point of view, but is also an asset from another point of view, because it can be very quick in deciding these kind of things. And it's operating now with a borrowing capacity kept at 500 billion euros. But it has a paid up capital of only 80 billion euros. So this means that we have a borrowing capacity about 6 times the capital, the paid up capital. At the same time, the European Stability Mechanism has a virtual capital of more than 700 billion euros. This means that if we think that 6 or maybe even more is the percentage, that it's the multiplier for the borrowing capacity of the ESM, and we think that we can call the money on the ESM from now until 10 years, this means that in 10 years we can arrive to a borrowing capacity of 4 trillion euros, which is a huge amount of money, and it's a credible amount of money to implement all the measures that might be of interest for the local communities. So I know that in the recent debate in Italy, especially, there's a sort of schizophrenic discussion about this kind of instrument, but I think that it can actually be exactly the instrument that can bridge the gap between the institutions, the European economic governance institutions, and the citizens, which can realize that European economic institutions, even the ESM, can provide a useful tool for their everyday life. And at the same time, I think that it's a useful instrument to fill the gaps between the different countries and regions, which is bound to be increased and not certainly decreased by this COVID emergency. Thanks.
Well, this sounds interesting, but I don't think it is in the debate, in the European debate. I know that actually there is one instrument which is clearly will be clearly inside the recovery plan on Wednesday, which will be related to the Cassa Depositi e Prestiti and the other promotion banks in Europe. And this is the so-called solvency instrument that there will be in the recovery plan, and it will help, in particular, the companies that have problems because of the COVID-19 and will have to be recapitalized, for instance. But it's quite interesting, the idea that the ESM could be something totally different from what it has been until now, and even become probably the opposite in the perception of the public opinion, because it is seen as an instrument to impose austerity, to cut social spending, to cut expenditure, public expenditure, and instead it could be an instrument to promote this public, localized public goods. Well, if I can ask a question, how do you think, Professor, that this could work? I mean, there should be a proposal from the Commission or from members. I mean, this is not a community instrument. It is from member states. So there should be a proposal from member states to transform the mechanism into this new instrument. And do you think it is realistic? Do you think that there are countries that would promote that? And do you think that the opposition from the frugal countries, for instance, would be? Do you think that they would be convinced for something like that? Thank you.
Well, thank you for this question, because it allows me to explain how this paper was born. Actually, it was not a paper which was born out of the blue, but it was a sort of answer to a letter sent by the most important majors of the most important cities, capital cities in Europe, to the president of the European Commission in February. And then there was someone else who added himself. Sala in Italy, Bratislava, Warsaw, Bucharest, Belgrade, and so on and so forth. Kikon. There are many big cities that demanded, especially to the European Commission and to the next multi-annual financial framework, let's say to the next European budget, to provide specific instrument for the community level. That was before the COVID, let's say, or just at the beginning of the COVID breakthrough, of the COVID pandemic. And so we thought that with the COVID, with the pandemic, this urgency, let's say, this bottom-up request would be even more dramatic. So that was a way to provide an answer to this kind of bottom-up question. And it also relates to the fact that sooner or later there must be some kind of bottom-up, let's say, listening to people. Well, we all know that there was supposed to be the conference on the future of Europe that probably will never be. We don't know, although Macron and Merkel took it back again in the document 3 days ago, saying that there must be some kind of conference on the future of Europe. I believe that that kind of conference that was projected, that was imagined until February is dead completely. But there should be some kind of listening to what kind of Europe people want. I think that in this kind of debate, this kind of proposal can have some room of maneuver, let's say. And so it's basically a paper meant for a bottom-up process. It's not meant for a top-down advocacy, let's say. But at the same time, we think that, I don't know, we can think about it with Alfonso, but we can also try to spread this kind of idea to other policymakers in order to ask for specific measures from the government. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Actually, the idea that the conference for the future of Europe could be revived now, thanks to the Franco-German paper, can come to my mind as well. I think they actually put a lot in that paper to be reformed in the EU system, in particular the competition rules. But it's quite an interesting idea. Well, I think now it's up to Susanna, and Susanna will talk about the very controversial ruling of the Federal Constitutional Court in Germany, from Karlsruhe, and it looks like, I mean, when it came out on the 5th of May, it was really a shock for many people, I think, and I think nobody would expect that a few days after, 2 weeks after, the Germany would come with a Franco-German proposal that is actually, it could be seen as a reaction to that. I mean, the Constitutional Court was saying we have not decided that there should be a sort of federal state response to the crisis. We cannot accept that because it's ultra vires, and because it has not been decided at political level, and that's it. The political level comes out with something which goes towards more federalism, we can say. I mean, more community in the response to the COVID-19. So, Susanna, explain to us how do you see this? Thank you.
Thank you, Lorenzo. And yes, you read my mind, actually, because I think exactly the same. Courts are part of a political discourse, let's say, and they have to be put in perspective. The European Court of Justice, the German Constitutional Court, in a wider context where there are also governments, public opinions, and sovereign nationalistic parties, and questions and answers coming from bottom up and from top down. And so in this perspective, yes, I think that the German Constitutional Court decision is a reaction to the interventism of the ECB, and I think that the German-French proposal is a reaction to the German Constitutional Court, in a sense. So let me explain better of these passages. So we had on April 23 the European Council endorsing two basic lines. One from the Eurozone and from the Eurogroup, which was the idea of using the ESM, and we heard how it should work or it could work. And the second from the Commission, which was this recovery fund. Of course, there are two different things, as the ESM is something we already know, and even if it's gonna change its attitude, it's something which is there. On the other hand, the recovery fund is something we don't know, and at the moment nobody knows actually. And it's interesting to see what will come up after the end of the month, when the proposal of the Commission will be ready. But in the meantime, to main happenings, to main events, to major events were the decision by the German Constitutional Court of May 5 and the German-French proposal of May 18. So the German Constitutional Court. It's interesting because, of course, it doesn't relate directly to what is happening, as it was a decision concerning the quantitative easing, which was deliberated in 2015. And the decision concerning the legitimacy of the activity of the ECB by the European Court of Justice was adopted on December 2018. And let me explain, first of all, for those who are not experts in European law, why it was such a big shock, this decision. It was a big shock not just for the content of the decision, which was quite strong in itself, as we will see, but it was a shock because it was the first time that somebody questioned the competence of the European Court of Justice to have the final word on the interpretation and the application of European law, because it was a decision concerning inside the procedure, so-called preliminary ruling. And so before deciding on the direct appeal by a huge number of citizens against the activity of the ECB, buying, public bonds of state debts during the 2015 and beyond, the so-called quantitative easing, the recurrents were claiming that this activity of the ECB was ultra vires, which means it was outside its own mandate, which is the stability of prices and the stability of the euro. So a step back is necessary. Since 2012, so since the beginning of the sovereign debt crisis in Europe, the ECB enlarged its interpretation of what it intended for price stability. And I think a turning point was the famous London speech by Mario Draghi, where he said we will do whatever it takes to save the euro. So to save the euro means to save the financial stability of the euro area, which is a much bigger goal than just maintaining or keeping price stability. And as the ECB motivated in each document, the financial stability is a precondition for price stability. And the survival itself of the euro is the precondition for the stability of the euro. So that's quite obvious. So, of course, the ECB was a bit forcing the treaty, which narrows the scope of the activity of the ECB. But there was a sound reason for it, and I think the ECB explained itself very well. And the reason was that in times of crisis, the European budget was too little to be of rescue of any state in distress, so to face crisis, financial crisis, whatever. And so the ECB had to go to the rescue of states, and it did. And in a certain sense, all the European political institutions endorsed or accepted very willingly this interventist attitude of the ECB. This was not the case with Germany, and it happened often during the last decade that the German governor was in the minority bloc, was defeated inside the ECB decisional committee, governing council, where all the governors of the central banks of the Eurozone are sitting, and so Germany was not really. Germany, I simplify a bit, I know, because Germany is not, a bloc, but many Germans, let's say, were not really happy with this attitude, because there is a very strong feeling of fear of inflation in Germany for historical reasons, and there is also a very strong feeling of the need for fair management of public finances, and so. Supporting or rescuing states which are not really totally innocent for their management, not successful, let's say, management of public finances, not necessarily deserve to be rescued. Let's say so. So you see, there is some very strong popular feeling behind that. But apart from that, the ECB was in. We have to accept the idea the ECB was the best equipped. Actor on the scene, and it had a big role in keeping together the Eurozone, in rescuing the states. And point is that it is exactly what happened also with the COVID-19 crisis, because the first to act in the half of March, 16 March, was the ECB, which launched this huge pandemic purchase program, which is intended as a purchase program for 750 billions of purchasing of bonds in the Eurozone. And so you see that what was intended for the German Constitutional Court to be ultra vires in 2015 could be much more now, and this decision is a political decision which has a big impact of what's happening now. But point is that it's not just a decision on the ECB, it's a decision on the decision of the Court of Justice concerning the ECB, because the Court of Justice accepted in his preliminary ruling that the ECB was acting inside the treaty, because accepted the reasoning behind the action of the ECB, and accepted also to stop the legal reasoning where the economic technical reasoning had to take place. So there was a self-restraint of the European Court of Justice. They didn't want to enter in the merit of the technical decisions of the ECB. While on the contrary, the German Constitutional Court did it, and pointed out that these quantitative easing measures can have bad impact on the big public, and generating bubbles in several markets, can generate inflation, can have a negative impact. Well, the European Court of Justice accepted the idea that the monetary tools and the monetary policy of the ECB can have, and let's say it should have, some economic impact, otherwise there wouldn't be any monetary policy at all. So accepted the idea that an impact can be acceptable, and it's up to the bank to evaluate if it is acceptable. But the treaty, unfortunately, for reasons, historical reasons, and for legal, not really well understood sometimes reasons, makes a distinction between economic and monetary policy. And while the ECB has a competence in monetary policy, whatever is economic policy, let's say macroeconomic and fiscal policy, is in the hands of member states. So it's not even a shared competence. And so it is clear that the larger the role of the ECB, the less or the more limited is the role of member states. And so this is the border we are discussing, the border between the ECB role and the member states role, not just two institutions in the same legal order, but two different legal orders actually. And so the German Constitutional Court entered into this political debate clearly with the intent to stop monetary measures to have a big impact on economy. And so it's perfectly consequent, in my opinion, that 10 days after we have the German-French proposal relaunching this recovery plan, because as it's clear after the decision of the German Constitutional Court that by interpretation and by tools of monetary policy, we cannot go too far, let's say, and intervene too much in the economic arena, then it's up to states and it's up to European political institutions to take the stand for sustainability of public finances and for recovery. So I think this is a reaction. Of course, it's another, let's say, it's another interesting political step. It's not yet the final step because, of course, we had the reaction to the reaction. We had already declarations from several governments not sharing the proposals in the Franco-German document. Just a few words about this Franco-German document, because not only there is the idea to increase the amount of money which was foreseen by the Commission to up to 1 trillion, so more than the 500 billions foreseen, but there was also the idea to make it all grants instead of loans, and or a mixed formula, which was apparently in the conclusions of the European Council. But there is also another thing in the Franco-German proposal, which is some health policy from the Union, some bigger health policy from the Union, renforcer souveraineté sanitaire, which is interesting. So it's a new element in the debate, having some common health policy elements to face crisis. This is something completely absent from the debate before. And then it's up to the Commission to, let's say, propose its own recovery fund, but it will take into consideration what has been presented by the two governments. And yesterday I saw a document leaked from the Commission's proposal, which was published by Euractiv. And apparently there will be a big component of Green Deal inside this recovery plan. So the Commission will take this train, let's say so, to stress the points. So the greening of the economy and the reduction of the impact of fossil fuels on the environment, the renovation of buildings, to push for all this with this big money that apparently will be mobilized. Interesting. Everybody speaks about mobilizing money, not just having this money. So we wonder also, I wonder also how much of this will be a leverage effect on other money. Maybe our economist colleagues will say something about this. And so you see there are many actors at play at the moment. So the Commission will have this proposal after and taking into consideration the French and German document. But I think that this is a moment where all the governments can step in, and of course the ones against have already stepped in. But it's unspeakable that Italy, for instance, would step in to support the proposal of a big fund for granting. It's interesting also the idea of having all grants, which is the beginning of a mutualization. I mean, it's not the mutualization of the past, but it's the mutualization in the future, which means everybody will be responsible through the European budget for investments which will be maybe concentrated, focused more in the weaker countries. So this is so some sort of mutualization, which is new in the debate. Interesting enough, the other interesting point is that it seems that the resources will have as legal basis the own resources article in the treaty, which means unanimity. And so it will be quite a tough negotiation, and also these resources will appear in the European budget. So this means that they will have to pass through the unanimity for the multi-annual financial framework, which is going to be discussed. So we have a double unanimity, and this means that in a way or another, everybody will be part of this negotiation, which means not only northern and southern countries, but also eastern countries, and then the things become even more complicated. So I stop here because I don't want to take too much time, and there is also the possibility for everybody who is listening to send us questions. I would like only to add that there are not only this conference for the future of Europe, and I have already promised, let's say, to the office of the commissioner in charge, Commissioner Zucca, to send our conclusions from our webinars to the discussion as a contribution to the discussion. But there is also a consultation open on the future of economic governance. So I invite all of you, if you have some key points, and I already heard some interesting proposals, to send me a few lines, because we can produce a document and forward it to the Commission. Thank you, and I give back the word to Lorenzo.
It's working. Well, thank you, Suzanne. That's also very, very interesting, actually. Also, that we actually thought the same about the fact that it was the Court of Justice, the Federal Court, Constitutional Court, that probably was at the origin of this paradigm shift, I would call it, in the German government, in Merkel's attitude towards this intervention in the fiscal policy of the EU. And I think there is still a lot to say about the Franco-German document, because all the discussion about it has been focused on the 500 billions figure, and the fact that there will be grants and not, they should be grants and not loans. One thing I was reflecting on is that actually when they say 500 billions, they are talking only of the recovery fund, but the recovery plan will be much bigger than that. In the recovery plan, as we understand it here from Brussels, the recovery fund will amount to 1/2 of the total volume that will be involved in the recovery plan. So 50% will be the recovery fund, which will be called Recovery and Resilience Facility. This is the name, RRF, Recovery and Resilience Facility. And that will be 50% of the whole plan. And then around 20% will be in the other instrument, which will include the solvency instrument, and that is money for the promotion banks and for the recapitalization of private enterprises that have suffered from COVID, and also a lot of reorientation of the cohesion funds inside the plan. So I don't know how the rest, the 30% that is still we don't know where to put will be, but if 50% of the whole plan is 500 billion euros, as the German Franco-German plan says, then we would be around 1 trillion. The problem is that probably there will be a big negotiation on the volume as well, because we have to take into account Austria, the Netherlands, the Denmark, and Swedish government, and it could be a little bit less, and it could be that a part of it will not be grants, it will be loans anyway. So the whole thing is in this very moment is in discussion inside the Commission and between the Commission and the different member states. So we don't know what the final result will be, but this is, I think, a good change, because it has really changed the equilibrium among the different forces. And one last thing I would like to say, it's very, very important, the own resources issue. The fact that the Commission is saying we want new own resources, they have not said anything on which kind of new own resources they are thinking, but it's clear there that there is the so-called carbon tax, the frontier carbon tax, or adjustment carbon tax, that will be in order to avoid carbon leakage, and it could be quite interesting. It could have quite a relevant number figure for new own resources, and then own resources always inside the Green Deal logic. So more plastic taxes, taxes on CO2, and all these kind of things. And there's still the idea of the financial transaction tax that could go also to feed the new own resources. So the debate on new own resources.
The digital tax too, no? I think.
And the digital, yes, absolutely, and that is also in the Franco-German paper, the digital tax. So and also there is the idea, but this is not for own resources, of a minimum company tax, minimum tax for companies. In the different member states, but it's a big debate, the one on own resources, and I think it will be from there that we will have a lot of new ideas, because that is the way to pay for these resources that we need now for the recovery in a more equal way, let's say. I think we can stop there. I don't know if Susanna, if you think we should open any other issue, but what is the timing now? Is there anything else that we need to do?
Thank you, Renzo. We have other 10 minutes. Even 15 if you want, but I have a question for me to the audience, so with your permission, I will give myself the floor to answer. In the European law legal terms, the last word is for the European Court of Justice. And this is why this decision from the German Constitutional Court is disruptive, because after a preliminary ruling, the national judge has just to apply the decision of the European Court of Justice. And so this is the first time ever that a judge doesn't do so, and this is quite worrying, because if such an important judge has done so, this means that others could do the same, and so this could really put in danger the European legal order. This, of course, this last word of the European Court of Justice is what is written in the treaty since 1957. Point is, from the perspective of the German Constitutional Court, it has the last word because it touches the fundamental values in the German legal order. This is known as counter limits doctrine, which also the Italian Constitutional Court uses or declares to use, but with a much more cautious attitude. So here we are on the border of the legal orders, let's say so. And yes, Germany and France are two governments, so this is clearly an example of top-down. Point is that every country has the possibility to make political proposals. Then the decisions are not taken by two countries, that's for sure. And I would like to see Italy propose more, for instance, to be more propositive and more proactive in the European legal order. And so, yes, I think it's the democracy is a place where everybody can make proposals. Not everybody can make decisions on its own, but everybody can make proposals. So the decisions are taken by the political bodies with according to the procedures defined by the treaties and the constitutional rules, that, let's say so, of the system. But I would like to leave the floor to the colleagues for a short remarks.
If I can add one word on that, Susanna and
yes,
Renzo.
please, Francesco.
You also have, I completely agree with you. The problem is not who make the proposal, but who make the decision. And there will be even too much democracy, if I can say this way, because every single government will have the possibility to basically veto the decision, because this is unanimity. So the problem here is not that too little possibility to participate, but even too much, if I can, yeah? Because maybe majority would be a more suitable way to take this kind of decision, but this is what we have at the moment. And if I can add substantively, this proposal builds on a non-paper which has been presented by the Spanish government, actually. So I want to give credit to this proposal, because it happened that the Ministry for the Economic Ministry of Spain nowadays used to be a very high-level, top-level official of the Commission, and she has been working for many years in the Commission, and in particular on own resources. Okay, so she knows perfectly what she's speaking about, and the non-paper by the Spanish government is very much interesting and represent the basis for this Franco-German. So I don't see it this big problem which with top-down or whatever, because other governments are fully involved. And of course, they kind of put the print of that, but this is for a very clear political reason. So the German government wanted to react. So I don't see here a problem of hegemony. If hegemony is this one, so welcome hegemony.
Can I ask a question to Fabio? Because I think I was intrigued, actually very interesting idea. I confess I have not seen your paper, but I mean, coming from you and from Alfonso, I don't doubt it's certainly an excellent proposal. Now, the idea of putting resources in some kind of a promotional institution like Caisse de Dépôt or KfW, I think that sounds of course very good. And the fact, I think everybody's interested to look at ESM, because it's like a bazooka with a lot of ammunition, and it's free, it's there, and nobody wants to use it. So I think we should make use of it, which is fine. But in principle, wouldn't it be better to put this idea of Europe, which is excellent, and local investment, local authorities, and I think that's exactly what we need. I mean, but why not put it with the EIB? I think we would have to reform the EIB. That's clear. But if you're talking of a promotional instrument, the EIB is the right one. And the related question, I think we are trying to stretch a little bit the role of ESM from its original concept. I mean, ESM was a tool, was conceived as a tool to save states in the process of losing access to the market. That's what it was. I mean, because it is the child of the sovereign crisis. And now I think we have added a new facility within it without conditionality, so to speak, and we may invent other things. But I think the basic idea is to make it work as for this purpose, which is extremely important. I mean, but I think the original idea of the Commission was to put this mechanism within the community legislation, so not outside in the intergovernmental. And I think this is one of the major weakness of the mechanism for political reason, I think. But I think, I hope that we can go towards the reform of ESM. I mean, would you be in favor of, taking out of the intergovernmental and be put into the community mechanism with the authority of Court of Justice and the Parliament and the Commission, I mean, within as a community instrument more than intergovernmental ad hoc fund?
So may I reply? Okay, I reply. No, thanks, Paolo, because these are crucial issues if you want to make this proposal operational, let's say. I start from the second. Of course, yes, we would prefer to have the ESM brought back to the in the realm of European institutions and not just have an intergovernmental institution. This is the reason why, for example, we suggested that in the longer term, the priorities should be set not by the ESM, but by the European Commission. So how do you want to spend the money should be set in a unitary way, let's say, by the European Commission and monitored by the European Commission, not by...
and the Parliament, of course.
And the
European institutions, you're right.
To reply to the first question, I will reply what I already answered to Antonio Padoa-Schioppa, who posed the same problem, because we asked some friends to referee, let's say, the paper before we published it. And Antonio Padoa-Schioppa made exactly this kind of remark. Why not the European Investment Bank? And the reply was very easy from me. Because the European Investment Bank is designed, is very well built, let's say, but is designed to fill the gaps between different regional rhythms, let's say, of development. So it's designed exactly to do something to cover divergences, let's say, to face divergences. This is not meant explicitly as a problem of divergences, because even Turin, Milan, Barcelona, Frankfurt, they are the ones who undersigned this document. The cities who undersigned this document might be in need of this kind of money, and why not? So the European Investment Bank can do something different from this point of view. This is merely an instrument to support a general restructuring, let's say, of the economic and social activity in a multi-layered level. It's to provide a help for this redesigning, let's say, of the European society. That's it, basically. But I can send you the link to the paper.
Thank you, Fabio. I think we can leave the last intervention to Renzo Consoli if he wants to add something. And of course, if anybody of you wants to make any further consideration, please, Renzo.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I think it has been really interesting. A lot of issues that need to be analyzed more in depth, I think. And I wanted to say one thing just concerning the ruling of the Federal Court in Germany, Susanna. I was surprised in a positive way by the reaction that there was by the Commission, the ECB, and in particular by the Court of Justice. The Court of Justice reaction was incredibly harsh, and also the Commission was quite clear. It's clear that they didn't want to enter into any polemics with the German judges. But the Court of Justice, I mean, we are used to, as journalists, we are used to see the press releases by the Court of Justice, which are always to be translated into journalistic language, because they are very legalistic, you know, in the way they are, the way they speak is really, every time you get one, you have to really to put it into normal words, because normal language, because it doesn't fit with normal language. But this time it was incredibly clear and harsh, and it said very clearly, the Court of Justice said there is the primacy of the EU law. It's our duty. We do it, and the national courts execute our ruling, our preliminary ruling. That's it. So it was really harsh, and I think it is what I was expecting from them. The thing that was interesting, it came from the communication services of the court, and the judges didn't even want to come into the polemic. So it was the communication services that say what the Court of Justice had to say about this. And you are right, it is really dangerous if now the Hungarians, the Polish start to put into question the EU law concerning, for instance, the rule of law, the measures that the Commission is taking, considering, for instance, in this moment, the situation in Hungary with the exceptional powers that have been given to the government because of the COVID-19 without any expiring date. This is just to something, but then I think the whole discussion was really interesting. I hope we can have more exchange on this later, perhaps after the Commission comes out with the proposal, which will be very articulated, very complicated, with a lot of things to discuss. So perhaps we can organize, I hope so, with the same participants, a discussion on that, because I think it will be really the opening of a new chapter in the EU integration history. And it will be, I hope, better than we were expecting, because there was a moment of deception, a big moment of deception in February, March, and even April, and when it looked like the EU was not being able to respond with an adequate response and firepower to this crisis. And now it looks like if Germany has gone to the other side, and there are only 4 member states that still don't understand, well, there is more hope. So that's my wish, and I hope we will be able to discuss a good recovery plan presented by the Commission Wednesday after that. And so I thank everybody, and it was great. You. Okay, thank you. See you soon, I hope.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. See you soon.
Bye.